Go for it.
Okay, so I asked to be on this panel because it is so critical for the different systems and the different stakeholders who are involved in the Behavioral Threat Assessment and Management Project to understand that they need collaboration, partnership, teamwork. This is not a law enforcement problem. This is not a school problem. This is not a family problem. It's everybody's problem. And we're all part of the solution to this. So we really want to focus on how do we build the different systems that are already out there into partnerships, especially when there's culture clashes, like law enforcement working with mental health clinicians, and mental health clinicians are working with law enforcement. We want to educate them about each perspective that's brought from that system, and then how they are partnered together to share information and then take back management strategies to mitigate the violence risk. Now, my work, just so you can understand a little bit of the method of my madness, I'm one of those very odd ducks that is a PhD in forensic clinical psychology, University of Nebraska, but I've been on law enforcement staff for my entire career, 22 years in the field. I spent 10 years with NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, as an operational psychologist, which included working on threat assessment cases, as well as counterintelligence and counterterrorism investigations. For the past 12 years, I've been a contract operational psychologist for the U.S. Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service. And my job at DS is to assist them with protecting our embassies and consulates overseas, all the foreign embassies and consulates in the U.S. Obviously, those are big targets, as well as preventing assassination against the Secretary of State and our ambassadors and other leadership, and targeting our facilities domestically. Beyond that, I work with corporations, Fortune 500 companies, with workplace violence prevention programs, insider threat prevention programs, and protective intelligence programs. And I work with schools and universities. So this has afforded my experience over the career of seeing different systems and how they do work together and don't work together. Now, I want to, next slide, please. I want to start with a simple concept that we were discussing this morning. Oh, okay. Here, I thought you had to, like, you know, appeal to higher authorities. Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, guys. Okay, so this concept of how do we get the different systems, law enforcement, mental health, families, communities, social services, to all buy into the behavioral threat assessment and management model. A lot of times they just can't wrap their brain around what this is. And I tell them it's really simple. It's just people doing stuff. It's a profound moment, right? It's people doing stuff. The stuff they're doing are acts of harm. Those acts of harm could be physical violence, mass casualty attacks, disclosure of information, theft and fraud. There's a whole variety of ways people can commit acts of harm. If your organization has a workplace violence prevention program and a separate insider threat program, it is critical that they're talking with each other and critical that they're all trained in the same threat assessment model, because that's where breakdowns happen, even within an organization, not even across the system, just within separate teams. The siloing kills us in threat assessment. We have to break those silos. We have to engage in partnerships. So I created this slide just to help people understand the problem. Why do subjects commit acts of harm? Top circles: anger, disgruntlement, financial reasons, political, religious, or ideological reasons, notoriety or infamy, which is a very concerning upward trend that we're seeing now in cases where people just want to make their mark in the world and get their Wikipedia page by being labeled a mass shooter. So they go out and commit these attacks. Now, you are dealing with underlying antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy in many of those. And in others, they're good folks who are struggling horribly and are now becoming suicidal and decide that they're not going to quietly kill themselves at home. They're going to go out and kill a bunch of other people and then kill themselves or engage in a firefight with law enforcement as a suicide by cop. We have dual identity and dual loyalty. That's when somebody, especially within the information security field and the intelligence community, someone who has descendants from another country that is considered one of the adversaries of the United States, and they are actually in the government in access to classified information, and they feel a compelling need for the mother country to know this classified, even though it should never be shared. And so people commit espionage for that reason. And finally, delusional beliefs, because sometimes subjects just have fixed and false beliefs. And they believe that the government is targeting them with psychotronic weapons, if you're familiar with the targeted individuals community. They believe that the CIA, the NSA, the NRO are all conspiring to steal their thoughts or to burn a hole into their head with our satellite systems. And these delusional beliefs do drive attacks. For example, Aaron Alexis, the attack at the Navy Yard in DC, was based on the delusional belief that the government was targeting him with low emission frequencies. Now, the bottom circles, acts of harm. There are a whole sort of acts of harm that one can do. We don't want to focus just on mass shootings, and we don't want to focus on this just as a gun problem, despite what the media and the public are seeing when they think about threat assessment. This is not just a gun problem. We're worried about explosives, vehicular attacks, knife attacks, arson, sabotage, anything that can cause harm or loss of life. So we do have physical violence on the one side, and then mass attacks, which I will call terrorism, mass casualty attacks on the other side. I'm not pinning terrorism to any particular political, religious, or ideological view, because we have domestic terrorism like the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City being bombed, and obviously we have overseas terrorism like 9/11. But there are a whole bunch of other things we do need to consider. Theft and fraud, because people will steal from their employers. Espionage and corporate espionage and information disclosure. What we just saw happen with the Massachusetts Air National Guard, who disclosed classified online for his own ego-driven purposes, and then that caused an international incident and damage, significant damage to our national security. Sabotage and property damage. If your organization is working around equipment that is either sensitive or can cause loss of life if misused or if broken, we see people who have committed sabotage and property damage in order to commit harm. Now, a benign example, if you all remember when Tesla was trying to crank out the Model 3 as fast as they can, and Elon Musk went to the facility to oversee it. Somebody who was working on the assembly line damaged the assembly line and stopped the entire process from moving forward. So that's one example. That's economic sabotage. Another example, I worked a case at NCIS where we had a Marine in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, who went into the parachute loft the night before a jump, and he cut the parachute cords on 13 sacks, 13 parachutes. And when the first stick of 5 Marines jumped out of the plane the next morning, 2 of them had chutes that failed. Now, thankfully, they pulled their reserve chutes. They had hard landings with broken bones. Thankfully, nobody died. If you saw that on the NCIS TV show, season 1, episode 2, in fact, they did have somebody die because Ducky needed a body to do an autopsy on. But I actually visited the set here in LA, walked in and saw the parachute cords everywhere. And I said, "Are you guys doing the Camp Lejeune case?" "Yeah, we just read about it in the news. So our writers wrote up a story." I said, "I just finished working that case." So kind of a cool thing of art imitating life. So focus on sabotage and property damage. Obviously, cyber attacks. We have to protect our cyber systems. But because Bradley Manning inserted a thumb drive into a classified computer in Iraq and downloaded all of these classified documents and then delivered them to WikiLeaks, we are now dealing with the government and corporations who have insider threat programs thinking about it as a cyber problem. This was a complete injustice to counter-espionage, because those of you that know about espionage know that it's done with bricks and mortar. It's people photocopying documents, stealing documents, what we just saw happen with Massachusetts Air National Guard. We see them taking photos with Minox cameras back in the day, now just cell phones, and then disclosing that information. So they're accessing this information not on cyber systems. We can't think of insider threat as only a cyber problem. Now, the 4 programs in the middle are programs most organizations have. And like if you're a corporation, if you're a government agency, and then schools, most organizations have a workplace violence prevention program, and that's to protect the employees from killing each other, and employee to supervisor. So detecting when there's a problem between two personnel and then intervening so nobody gets hurt. Counterterrorism program, especially with my government clients. We have a separate unit that just handles counterterrorism. Protective intelligence program. That's set up to help protect the senior leadership of a company or a government agency, as well as the facilities and the brand and reputation of the organization. So they're not focusing on employee violence or customer on employee violence. They're focusing on big picture things. And then finally, the insider threat program, which in many corporate circles is run by the IT folks, and they just focus on online behavior. These four entities not being trained in the same threat assessment model, not meeting regularly to discuss their caseload, will miss one subject escalating over time. A guy is reported for threatening to want to shoot his boss because the boss is undermining him and trying to get him fired, reported to workplace violence. He then continues in his anger in escalating and decides to steal documents from the company and give it to a competitor. So now that gets detected by insider threat. He then decides, I'm going to hold the CEO accountable because they are ultimately responsible for what happens in this company. And he threatens the CEO, and that goes to protective intelligence. If your units are not talking with each other and sharing information, they're going to miss one threat escalating over time, and somebody's going to get hurt. Now, I wanted to offer also a couple of discussion points to wrap up. Where do I need to point this?
Just throw it at it.
Yeah.
Where's our signal need to go?
It should be just anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's not working.
There you go.
Oh, thank you. All right. All right. Thank you. A couple of discussion points. I just wanted to be sure that we were discussing these on the panel, so I'm offering them up here. First and foremost, it's the need for organically, deliberately using that word because words matter, organically generated rather than mandated, community-based, multidisciplinary behavioral threat assessment and management programs. Now, we are seeing a trend where, and it's been around for a while, but it continues on. Attackers who are not affiliated with their targets. Think of what happened in Buffalo. Think of what happened in Boulder, Colorado. Think of the Sandy Hook Elementary School attack. Sandy Hook Elementary, Adam Lanza was not a student at the school. So therefore, a school threat assessment team would not have detected that threat because they're looking within their faculty, staff, and students. Workplace violence programs, the top two targeted retail stores, grocery stores, and they drove across the state to hit that target. So the target is not going to detect the threat. The threat was across the state. That's why we need community-based programs. For someone like a parent or a friend or a neighbor seeing concerning or suspicious behavior, to report that to their local law enforcement, ideally then that gets reported into the regional intelligence centers and the joint terrorism task forces and gets investigated. And that way we can prevent an attack that happens across the state. The issue with mandated programs is that there is a failure to adequately fund, train, and sustain legally mandated BTAM programs. State legislatures have been passing laws, especially with schools, mandating BTAM programs. That's not a bad thing. But if you're going to say you have to build this and you have to have this capability, it's got to be adequately funded and adequately staffed. And what we're seeing is states are mandating these programs and not giving the funding that leads to a lack of training or poor training and ultimately a fail in the system. And when the system fails, it makes us, the professionals who are doing this right, look bad. So case in point was the Chesapeake attack. Virginia has a legally mandated program for K through 12 and higher education, But that program, what came out after this attack, is that it has not been successfully sustained, funded, and trained. And it was really one counselor at the school who was taking it upon herself to be the threat assessment team. And it should never come to that. The third thing is the need for partnership and teamwork, as I previously discussed. Law enforcement, mental health, social services, families and communities, all of the different folks. Everyone's involved in the problem and everyone's part of the solution. We will discuss on the panel the culture clashes, right? We talked about how does law enforcement understand you are not a mental health clinician, but it doesn't mean that you do not have a role in threat assessment. We're not asking you to do psychotherapy. We are asking you to respond if there's a concern, gather some information, separate parties to make sure that nobody gets hurt, and then pass that information on to someone who can conduct an intervention. And when I lecture with a lot, most of my career has been lecturing, training law enforcement. And often I'll get from them, you know, Doc, we're reactive. We're not proactive. And this is a proactive primary prevention strategy. It just doesn't fit with what we do. And my response is, you ever rolled up on a domestic violence scene? They say, yes. What'd you do? Well, I separated the husband and wife. I interview the husband. I interview the wife. I understand what the situation is. And I don't leave the scene until I'm confident no one's going to get hurt or killed. Guess what? You're doing social work. So that's what we need when police are responding. There is a primary intervention moment and, more importantly, information gathering that could go back to the team for long-term solutions. Same with the mental health folks. They're not investigators. They're just used to treating people, fixing people. And they have a role in, as we discussed, the information sharing piece, the rules of HIPAA that prevent information sharing, and helping them understand that there are exclusions to HIPAA. You can't just hide behind HIPAA and say, I can't share information. If there's an emergency, yes, you can and you should. And sometimes if there's not an emergency, but there's significant concern that violence is going to happen, sometimes it's worth putting your own license on the line and violating an ethical code to do the right thing, because the ethical code and the license are not being flexible enough to do the right thing. And you take on the risk of getting a lawsuit filed against you or losing your license later. But at least nobody died, okay? That's where sometimes we have to make hard decisions on where the rules are not fitting with the situation and somebody's going to get killed. So we have to go beyond what the standard rule is because it wasn't written with this stuff in mind. Thank you. We'll pass on to the next person.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. I don't have slides. Can I use yours?
Sure. I brought some.
My talk, it'll be brief and it'll be a little bit different. I guess the benefit about being an old guy is that you can look back over the years, see what worked, see what didn't work, be able to share some ideas. The bad part about that wisdom, if you want to call it that, is you have to be an old guy. And so you take the good with the bad. But I'm honored to be able to be here today with all of you. You are some of the best at what you do in the entire field, so I am thankful to be here. In order to chart the course ahead, it's important to reflect for a minute on how we got where we find ourselves today. Just looking at Los Angeles and just within my own lifetime, I'll offer some experiences that help shape the policing landscape in America. And so often as California goes, so goes the nation. I've spent 40 years of my life in the policing profession, all here in Los Angeles with LAPD, Long Beach PD, and as LA County Sheriff. And every time you think you've seen it all, something else happens that just defies belief. I've seen more senseless killings, shootings, gang activity, drug and alcohol abuse than I care to remember. When we feel like we're making progress, conditions change, and it seems like we're set back dramatically. Those most impacted are always the people who can least afford to be, the underprivileged, the poor, and those who lack the ability to break out of their circumstances. They are usually not the people pushing for political changes. They just want their families to be safe and to have opportunities to be able to move ahead. I will not try to attempt to blindly defend the actions of any group. There are great people in every profession as well as people who should never have been allowed to become part of that profession. Policing is certainly no exception. When we look at, and I'm going back a couple of years now before the crisis we find ourselves in, but in policing in Southern California, for every 100 people who applied, 4 made it to the academy, 3 made it through the academy. I don't know of another profession that has a 96% washout rate. So as much as we try and do a good job is only getting the people most suited for that profession who enter it, we still end up with the situations we end up with. But it's, I think, a lot of it due to the nature of the profession, the often conflicting demands, and the chronic exposure to trauma. We see examples of behavior that's sometimes substantially less than we expect, and sometimes even criminal. There are also, however, acts of heroism, compassion, and sacrifice performed without recognition of any kind every single day. If you were to talk to first responders about that, they'd say, I'm just out there doing my job, and they're not looking for any accolades. Police officers are the only profession that have been recently required to wear a body-worn camera, and I'm a proponent of this, but should police be singled out for this strategy on their own? Are others not also in positions of responsibility where their actions and behaviors also affect people's lives? That's for society to decide. I go back a little bit, and when we talk about police relationships with the community and how did we end up where we ended up today, just a little bit of history, and I'm using LAPD as an example. But going back to the 60s and 70s and even before that, random patrol. Go out there and just randomly patrol, see what you run into. The bad guys aren't going to know where you're going or where you're going to be because you don't know where you're going or where you're going to be. And when we looked at that, and that was the state of the art. And that's amazing now to look back so many years and to see that that's what we thought was a good strategy. LAPD started the basic car plan back in 1969, and then team policing followed that. And the goal there was focus on a piece of geography. They called it territorial imperative, where you're responsible for whatever happens in this area 24 hours a day. And it's your job to problem solve and go out there. A much better strategy, I would argue. But we look too much at outputs, at the measures, things we could measure easily, number of arrests, number of FIs, numbers of citations. But what impact did that have on the community? We didn't really look at outcomes. And you get what you measure, and we did too often, and it wasn't what we should have gotten. And then we went as a measure of effectiveness with response time. Get there quick, and we did that, and we'd race from call to call. But in order to get to the next call, you had to leave there just as quick. So people felt like, yeah, the cops came here, they had me scratch out a report, sign it, and they were gone. And I didn't feel like I was getting the service that I deserved. So we moved on from that, but that was the state of the art again for a while, and this is not that long ago. And then in 1994, the Clinton crime bill introduced community policing by that title, looking at problem solving, community identified problems, and collaboration, community with the police, and other city and county agencies, other stakeholders that could make a difference. And we got great results. We started to build bridges that we hadn't seen previously. And so we moved on from that, and then came September 11th, 2001, and we ended up then with intelligence-led policing because we had to. But in too many places, we threw community policing out the window rather than using that as a tool to help us with intelligence-led policing. So we went from random patrol to focus patrol. CompStat came out of New York, and that focused us very intently on what was going on in our neighborhoods and then doing something about it. Then to predictive policing and using machine learning and artificial intelligence. So you sit here and you think, okay, what impact does that have on our relationship with the community and what's going to be next? So looking back again, whether it's called police reform or criminal justice system reform, under those labels, a lot has happened in the profession in a very short period of time. And I'll use California as an example. In 2011, we had realignment or Assembly Bill 109, which shifted the burden from the state to the county for incarcerating people who had broken the law. And that had a big impact. That was followed in 2014 by Prop 47, which changed many felonies previously into misdemeanors. And I'll give you an example. Drug offenses became misdemeanors. And some would argue with merit that, you know, it should be a health problem. It's not a criminal problem. Okay. But the way we had been set up to be able to deal with that, we had an ability to be able to force people into treatment when it was a felony. When it became a misdemeanor, we no longer had that ability to be able to get people to go to treatment. And as you all know, if you're an addict, then you need to be forced into something, because if you could do it on your own, you would have done that already. And so that was a big deal in California policing, and it limited new incarceration. That was followed 2 years later in 2016 by Prop 57, which increased good time credits for early release for people already in custody. So what we saw here is a decreased prison population in California in a short period of time by more than a third, from 165,000 people in 2006 to 95,000 people today. Sadly, but without meaningful support mechanisms such as counseling, addiction management, job training, strategies for success. And as a society, I think we need to ask ourselves, are these the outcomes we were hoping to get? And if not, well, then how do we go back, re-examine the issues, and come up with something that works better? 2020, we saw George Floyd, and the anti-police sentiment, recruitment, retention, and police legitimacy was questioned. Public perception, driven by media and social media, and then the body-worn cameras fed that. The voice of activists was given outsized attention, yet Gallup polling still showed policing with stronger approval ratings than one might have believed based on the media reporting. So again, all of this to say, let's take a look at the role of police. It's continuously expanding. We never say no. We started with order maintenance, law enforcement, and then counterterrorism, quality of life issues, homelessness, alcohol, drug abuse, mental health issues, medical intervention, and I say that meaning Narcan. We've given our folks Narcan, and they've saved countless lives in doing that. Tourniquets in the field. It used to be we would always wait for paramedics. If you put a tourniquet on, the belief was somebody would lose that limb or wherever you put it. And now we realize with medicine has evolved to a degree, and trauma centers are so prevalent in urban areas that you can put that on and save someone's life. And now almost everybody carries a tourniquet. And I advocated for these things as well as AEDs, automated electronic defibrillators, in every car. And that is such a lifesaver and a game changer for those that we can get to quickly. So we continue to modify, but we take these things on not because we feel we should be in the medical business, but rather we're out there 24/7 and we're there before the paramedics. So how can we not say no to taking on more duties that will save lives? Now we see the fentanyl crisis, change in that role again. Our deployment is on the way down, so specialties like narcotics, counterterrorism, gangs, human trafficking, cold case homicide investigations have unfortunately been cut back pretty dramatically. So we're operating well beyond our capacity. And as said in the program, there are 18,000 police agencies in America, but I would argue, but they're viewed by the public as a monolithic entity, the police. Each has their own hierarchy, level of training, resources, expectation, deployment ratios, and their own chain of command, their own mayor, city council, and whatever system they answer to. So there is, when we say policing, it means different things in different places, and that was by design. But police cannot operate in a free society without public support, proper resourcing, realistic expectations, and certainly strict accountability. Recruiting the best and the brightest is not achieved by demonizing an entire profession, but rather by appealing to a higher standard, a noble calling, a respected position in society. We must recalibrate our expectations of policing in America because, sadly, we have recently set ourselves up for failure. The public that we serve must be a partner as we move forward. Police cannot do their job to the community, but must do it with the consent and assistance of the communities that we serve. We tend to address problems in simplistic, politically appealing sound bites, a quick press conference claiming success, and back to business as usual. The problems of our society are complex, nuanced, and often multi-generational. There are no easy fixes. We do have the resources, the expertise, and the ability to be able to really make a difference, but we've lacked the political will. And I don't mean that from a partisan perspective. Neither party has been very effective in that. This requires a long-term commitment. Political cycles drive action, but they're not long-term. They go from budget year to election cycle to election cycle. We need a master plan that spans a generation and provides the foundation for the years that will follow that. It will take positive and strong leadership to rebuild what has been torn apart. We will all have a role to play in that effort. You see that each of you in your roles, but the public, unfortunately, does not get that perspective. We need to celebrate the positives, the successes, the milestones that we go through. Recruitment, retention, credibility, legitimacy, and the ability to be able to provide the level of service that our communities deserve is hanging in the balance. We cannot delay in addressing this crisis, first of all, by realizing we're in a crisis. Without effective, constitutional, and respectful public safety, no other institution, commercial activity, or other meaningful endeavor in our society can flourish. So I challenge all of you as to use your network, to use your voice as you go out there from here, and to be able to help set the course straight. Everybody plays a role, or else we don't succeed. And sadly, too many people are too busy doing what they do in their own lives with the challenges they face to see that big picture. So all of you are in key roles to be able to influence others, and I would ask that you give some thought to that, and I'd love to talk more here about that. So thank you for your time.
I think I have some slides. Or are they? Oh, Jim, why don't you tell me? All right. The last panel I was on, we had a tablecloth, so I might not have worn my hamburger and surfboard socks today. I want to thank you guys for having us. We're a different group. Susan said everything that we believe and we want to do, then Dr. David, and then these two. But our thing is that we're a community-based agency, and I feel like we have some answers. Real quick to address your thing about the firefighters. I'm a reserve deputy, spent about currently 22 years with the Orange County Sheriffs, as well as being a community member, running a community agency for the last 35 years. I started my program, my learning of emotional intelligence and aggressive behaviors when I just, at 18, started working in nightclubs. Then I went into executive protection and dignitary protection with the Sheriff's Department. So we read cues, learning these behaviors. But it was funny, I always tell a story. We have the Orange County Fair, and any of you heard of it? We go out, it's in Orange County, and I'm working as a reserve deputy with another regular, and we're walking by, and we see this lady go, see that man over there, those two men? If you don't eat your vegetables, to her kid, you're gonna get arrested. And we're all, and then this other guy walks by and goes, see that person? He's our hero. And I go, yes, firefighters aren't usually good looking, but why are they the hero? And all of a sudden she set that pace for law enforcement. So we see that learned behavior that happens with parents. We were talking last night. You know, I was asking someone, okay, when you get a ticket and your kid's in the car, when that officer leaves, do you say, oh my gosh, sorry, I'm standing behind the post. Do you say, oh, he gave me the ticket. He's totally right. I was going 10 miles over the speed limit. You need to respect that man. No, it's usually, oh my God, I hate that guy and everything. So it's another behavior of not. And then also, we work with clients from all levels, persons with developmental disabilities, community members, and they watch Cops. Cops is never a great show for cops because someone's getting taken down. You know, the whole rule is you run from police, two things happen. They hit you, you hit the ground. So, but those are the things we're trying to break. And with our education, what we need is consistency, community, and that message. And what I mean by that, school brought us in for a 3-year bullying prevention program. And it was a pilot program to see what happens. Within the second year, towards the third year, bullying went down, reporting went up. Because there was that model that kept going. That's the one thing I think we're missing, is that the teaching aspects. Our agency works with, we have an On the Edge program. Let me see where we're at next. So if I press this, would this video work? Anyone know? Okay. All right.
Do you see what we see?
Did you see it? If only you could go back in time.
What would you do differently?
What would you have said?
Who would you have told?
What if you could get in front of the moment tragedy begins?
Do you see what we see? An opportunity for change.
That's not my slide. Help. Okay. Technology is my friend. What you saw there is our On the Edge program. It's a systemic approach to everything. It works with school resource officers. It works with teachers. It works with administration. It works with students. To what everyone's saying, it's a global effect. We have a parenting program. And it's because we're all talking about reporting, and a lot of people don't know how to report. A lot of our officers, our agency teaches law enforcement throughout the state. We're a post-certified agency. We've taught probably 8,000 or 9,000 in the last couple of years. We're trying to give them tools. How to connect, right? How to connect. We have a youth in crisis program, teaching you how to talk to a teenager. It's hard. I was presenting at a law enforcement our conference, and I asked, what scares you out there if you're doing a presentation? 14-year-olds. I don't want to go out in front of 14-year-olds. I'll run into a building, whatever you tell me what to do, I'll do that, but 14-year-olds scare me. And it's true, it's how do we connect? I mean, they're just mean. I have a 10 and 11-year-old and they're mean. Literally daily, my son goes, how's your dad bod? I go, you're 10, why are you breaking my self-confidence like that? But it's how to connect back and forth with them. It really is communication. Our thing is how. You're right about the stigma with mental health. I was sitting at the table right here and I kept thinking they're evaluating me. I rubbed my face like this. What are they thinking? Am I crazy? And they were, and it'll probably come up. But also with law enforcement. We teach law enforcement, remember, I was talking about this last night. You have a vest, and the community calls it a tactical vest, military vest. We call it like an orthopedic helper. It takes the weight off our waist, right? We put stuff up here, it feels good. And when we put our hands over here, it just takes the weight off. But community thinks, and I've had a number of people tell me, I thought he was going to punch me. Nothing, not even a thought in our mind is that. But that's how the community. So we talk about posture. When you get too close, you're comfortable with a gun. Many community members aren't when they see that weapon. So how do we make that communication? How do we build down? Even I got down here because when I work with a group of survivors, I usually kneel. I talk eye to eye. Even up there, it's something like I was like, Heidi, you're not taking the mic, by the way. No. But it was like, I feel this more of a connection. We teach law enforcement how to make that connection. We teach teachers how to make a connection. We teach students how to talk to law enforcement, how to talk, because you're right. Everyone knows something that goes on prior. And that's our ultimate goal, is prevention. Because the run, hide, fight is a model, and like the other Susan said, we need something as a response, of course. But we want to do it prior to that. Teachers they came into teaching, right, I want to help this kid. I want to help him mold him. I want to help him be the best he can be. I didn't come in to run, hide, and fight. But our lives have changed a bit. Teachers are underserved, undereducated on what the tools of looking for behavioral cues, how to de-escalate something, how to see it, how to communicate with law enforcement, how to make sure those communications go through. Like this Susan was saying, it could get written into a file and go nowhere. In our bully prevention program, we call it ninja reporting, because no one wants to be seen reporting something. Either they're going to get targeted, or they're going to become bullies, or they're being called tattletales, different things. So we have to create environments where people feel comfortable and also know how to report. It's scary to report something, and even to see. We want to create student leaders who can help program and make it a consistent program. Many people see our program, and there's many programs out there. it should be like CPR. It should be yearly. It should be a consistent thing so we can build that communication. So if anyone can find the Where's Waldo, I will give you a challenge coin. No, these are, this slide is super confusing, but these are all the areas that we have taught through the 35 years of our agency. The one thing that's big is the bridge the divide. Our community is so split. I go and teach law enforcement. They say, who's teaching community? I teach community. Who's teaching law enforcement? We're separated. And we were talking last night. If we can write a list of things on both sides, what community wants and what law enforcement wants, it'd be identical. I want to be heard. I want to be seen. I want to be respected on both sides. I had a little challenge yesterday. We talk about how to, we try to tell law enforcement, try to treat people like you want your family treated. So you step back for a second and see things. And there was another way of treat people how they want to be treated. But that takes a lot of brain power, I think. And I think just if you get that core of niceness. We also teach individuals that have no empathy built in. So we give them a list. This is what you have to your checklist when you're talking to someone. This is your checklist. But those are the things that we work. And our biggest thing is changing mindsets, truly, to change outcomes and to save lives. Because when you can make that change in someone, and we see it in every audience, community, law enforcement, students. We work with a group of kids that are, it's called GRIP, gang retention, where they're going to possibly jumped into gangs. And we work with them, but we bring in law enforcement, uniformed officers, one time to the camp. And we have kids that are terrified. We brought the bloodhound in, who's the dopey, funny dog. They wouldn't go outside because they were raised by pit bulls that fight. They were scared, and we were able to bring them out. Then a couple kids wouldn't go out because someone who just looked like them just arrested my dad. We want to bridge that. We talk to them. We tell them, ask them questions. Have you been bullied? Yeah, I was bullied as a kid. Do you get scared out there? Yeah, I totally get scared. I want to go home to my family. Those are the questions that will start bridging that divide. Humanizing both sides, humanizing mental health, humanizing law enforcement, humanizing the community side so they understand. That's our ultimate goal, is education. And that's why we were talking about the gaps. We want to fill that education. All right, let me see where we're at. So this is our information. Any questions? I do want to leave you with what Robert F. Kennedy said. The cost of comfortable inaction outweighs the cost of action. We need to have a consistent level of training. We're educators. We all are educators. So we have to have that education out there. We have to make sure we're training and we're teaching. Because like you said, there's all kinds of things that people point fingers at, or what are things that are doing. But it's education. It's community. And we got to build that, and we got to get back. So thank you very much. That's all I got.
All right. So, Neil, I managed to come up here without a watch or phone. So what's our time check? Thank you. All right. I want to leave as much time for questions as possible. But when we talk about systemic gaps, we've heard lots of examples volunteered already, whether it's that organic support for behavioral assessment and management teams, sustained funding and training for those teams, that trust between communities and law enforcement that is essential for those systems to work, and the communication. You only used that word a couple times. Yeah, I was expecting at least 100.
Neil told me no.
But that shared understanding, shared recognition, humanization, and communication between communities and law enforcement as well. I want to challenge the audience to ask questions, but also, you're all experts in this room and watching online. What are additional systemic gaps that you think should enter into this discussion? And ask questions of our panelists for strategies to address them.
I have a challenge coin for anyone to ask me a question.
Got Michael Brown to start
Not
us.
you, Heidi.
Thanks very much for your presentations. I don't know if this is a gap or if you see it as a gap, but I'm very interested in your thoughts on the role of the student in this, right? We have a lot of practitioners in the room, a lot of law enforcement in the room. We have people doing the work, but they're really, the person at the center of this is the student. And the video, we saw the student, we saw the look on their face and the feelings that they're going through. Whether that's in behavioral threat assessment or training or development or trust building, what have you learned? A two-part question. Do you see a gap in getting input from students to broker the development of these programs that are affecting them directly? And do you sense any optimism or inspiration from students who really see this as their generational challenge? I would ask that question really to all the speakers today. This is, I have 3 daughters, 18, 15, and 12, and you know, this is their generational issue. You know, for me, growing up on the East Coast, it was fire drills, or it was, you know, worried about, you know, drug dealers in the 80s and things like that. Like these were the stories that I was hearing growing up. Kids are hearing about school shootings all the time. So I'm interested in your thoughts on if there are gaps on getting student input to help develop your programs, and also what inspiration do you get from the kids themselves? Thank you.
Go for it, Stuart.
Well, first of all, nowadays, I don't know if you've spoken to a teenager, because if you have, you're a magician. Usually it's a text message, even if you're sitting right here. So no one talks. They're literally, my daughter's 11, and her and her friend are texting each other. It's like, could you just talk and communicate? Oh, get out of here, old man. That hurts again. But the thing is that we have to. And yes, we've seen it. That case study, students were talking. The reason why there's more reporting, because everyone was watching out for each other. They understood the things. Again, we have to give them the tools. Unfortunately, it may not be, I see a lot in the school districts, the checkbox is run, hide, fight. It's not a communication building. But these are life skills. These aren't just for mass shootings and bullying in high school or middle school. It's taking these skills to the workplace, because you deal with workplace violence, which is workplace bullying. All these skills are a life skill that they keep learning things. And yes, I feel that we have seen in our test models, because again, it's a funding aspect, like you were saying, a great growth in understanding of what this means. And those are the things that we're trying to push. And I am very hopeful. That's why I'm here, because we were talking about retirement last night. I was going to go work in a surf shack, even though, because I'm a terrible surfer. But the thing is that we're here to make a difference. And everyone here is an expert in this field. And ultimately, yes, if we can continue to get... So our agency also teaches survivors, you know, I was saying, or sexual assault survivors. But if we only taught the survivors and not males or different females, we're only one side of the problem. We have to have everyone involved. And those are the ones that really hear. You see after these shootings, how many students say, oh yeah, he was acting weird, or she was acting weird, or I saw something different. But they're afraid to ask, didn't know how to ask. And when we start building what we found, we use this word back off, and it says back off, back off. It builds a community when they're there, whether we're at the workplace or whether we're at schools. They start building each other. It's only a memory recall thing about looking for situations that are happening and giving permission to say it's okay to talk to someone and talk to them and how it's doing. So yes, that is, I feel, a big component and probably a big gap on a lot of the things. Throwing that gap word in for you. Anyway, sorry. Anyone else?
Russell or Jim?
Yeah, just a quick addition to that. I think we need a campaign across the country to be able to focus on young people and to be able to challenge them. In policing recruitment, we've often said, if you want to see a difference, be the difference. And I think that kind of focus where we challenge the younger residents of this country to don't accept the way it was before, but show leadership. Every one of you is a leader, and make it different and better as we move forward as a nation. And it was said earlier on that we're dealing here with national problems, but with local solutions. And I think something like that, we look at social media so often as having such a negative impact, but a campaign structured well that challenges young people to step up and be better than they would have otherwise been, and then to hold each other accountable for that kind of behavior, I think that could get legs. Because I think we're in a position right now with even people in in elementary school are seeing that things are not good, and we need to make them better. So I think giving them the task, you know what, you're in a great position. You got a long life ahead of you. Make this as good as it can be for everybody, and model the behavior each and every person. And I think that will really get some traction.
I'm going to take moderator's prerogative for just a moment, and then I'll get back to you. But
Do I have to leave?
I've got Tony in the corner, Tony Scrow from Adventure Partners and McCain Institute work together on a Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships funded program called Invent to Prevent that is just that type of campaign. We challenge high school students and university students to design their own campaign. So anyone who works with schools who's interested in participating in that program, talk to any of the McCain staff here today or to Tony Scrow in the corner, and we're happy to connect you with that program if you want to take Jim up on his suggestion and challenge youth to create their own campaigns. Can we get to Russell, and then we'll get back to
Russell, you can wait. Whatever.
I just have one follow-up on campaigns and how important that is. Social change is possible. Think about Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. Think about the anti-litter campaigns of the 1970s. It took a long time for people to embrace the message and start practicing it, but it did happen. So what we need now is this campaign that says it's not okay to go out and shoot your coworkers or your schoolmates, or, attack them and violently in any way, bully them. The challenge is going to be, right now, we do have a successful campaign from DHS with See Something, Say Something. That has become part of the community's words, that they realize I have a role. But the messaging needs to expand now to the intervention piece. How, it's instead of see something, say something, it's one, see something, do something. That's come out recently. And another is be an upstander instead of a bystander. Basically, get involved. When you see someone struggling, go out there and help them. Part of what we've seen over the past 30 years is this degradation of connectivity and social caring, and more individuation than understanding community responsibility. So that's what the messaging can help, and it would help if we can get more programs like yours to get out there and put the messaging out to change people's minds.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Sorry. I'm really bad at this. No, I was just going to briefly say that in our programs, our pilot programs, is we have to get skin in the game. When we teach officers, because a lot of them are not listening, don't want to talk about pronouns, don't want different things, but we give them a slide of what can happen with the use of force, as you would know. They have to do a personal asset tally and different things. So our model for the kids is, what do they like most now? They like likes. They want to be influencers. What campaign is going to grasp the most attention out there? So we try and use this social media now that everyone, again, doesn't speak. They just watch TikTok or they watch, YouTube, whatever, the Facebook. But so we need to grab them somehow to make it interesting for them. So along with your campaign is get them invested. What you're probably doing is create your own campaign. Let's see how many likes you get. Let's see how it resonates with the other students out there. Those are the things that are our next step. Life has changed. We're all old, not you. You're not you. But it has changed. So we have to change with it. Nothing's coming back. I keep waiting until these stupid computers go away, but they're not going to happen. It's just going to stay like this. But those are the things we have to look at, and those are the things that we want to invest. And then I will stop.
Yes, Jumana. Coming with the microphone.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much for the presentation. My question is for Sheriff McDonnell. Once a sheriff, always a sheriff. So we'll always address you as Sheriff McDonnell. You provided a really nice historical context as to how we ended up where we are. And you sort of took us through the various reiterations of different initiatives, programs, but also policies and laws. One of the things, and I think it's really an opportunity with the people we have in the room, most of whom are practitioners in prevention, intervention, mental health, and social workers. One of the things that LAPD instituted was having MEU units embedded within law enforcement. And I'll have to say this with the recognition that we as a society have placed an unrealistic burden on law enforcement agencies and personnel to address just about every social issue. So there is that model with having MEU units embedded with LAPD. If you could talk a little bit about challenges. I know scalability has been incredibly difficult. And the truth of the matter is, just as we operate in the law enforcement space, and those of us who are operating in the mental health, social work space, looking at social protective factors, there is definitely an interdependency and an overlap. But yet, we still operate in silos. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit on that.
And I'm just going to take a moment to define terms for the non-Angelenos, MEU, Mental Evaluation Unit.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Germana. Great question. When I look at policing over the last 40 years, and if I was to cite one of the examples that was a real success, it would be the mental evaluation units. And those have been replicated across America. LAPD, LASD started back in the early 90s with these units that are hybrid unit where you pair up a mental health clinician with a police officer and they roll on calls. And what I found as sheriff, I increased the number of teams by threefold. And still, it was only a token versus what we really needed for a county that's 4,700 square miles and 11 million people. And we were able to set up a command post so that deputies in the field could call in and get advice, at least telephonically, on next steps, what to do, resources available. But that when we looked at the measures of success on that, if you send a patrol unit out and to deal with a problem, somebody's having a mental health crisis, generally speaking, their tools are limited. They're not going to have the skill set, the training, the expertise to be able to deal with somebody who's undergoing that crisis period. But you send an MEU unit out, you have then the ability to be able to have the safety provided by the police officer or deputy and the expertise of the clinician to be able to make a difference. And what we found is that when you leave the same people in the same assignments over time, they get to know the individuals in the community who are subject to these crises. That makes all the difference in the world when you can go up on a first-name basis, shake the person's hand, talk to them, comfort them, and say, hey, I know what you're going through. We're going to get you help like we did last time. If a patrol unit rolls out there, they've never seen this person before. They're using command presence to try and de-escalate any violence that may occur, and that comes off completely wrong to the person in crisis. And so when you look at what's worked and what hasn't worked, we have not sufficiently funded what works. And with the numbers we looked at in one little study we did at the Sheriff's Department, 95% of the people they contacted got help. They didn't go to jail. And if you were to look at a patrol unit rolling out on somebody in crisis, I would argue that the outcomes would be very, very different and not helpful to the individual in crisis or their family in the long run. So we need to do a better job of studying what works and replicate that and fund it, share that around the country. But that's something that has been a tremendous success for those who have adopted it. As I mentioned, many departments across the country are using it. But now as we're seeing the sentiment we've seen in the last couple of years, some of that effort has been defunded as well or cut back to the point where the focus is now on just sustaining patrol response to 911 calls. So as I mentioned in my little talk, that a lot of the things that we expect to have in a police department have been cut back way more than we would like to see. But this is one that I would advocate for tremendous return on investment, a humane way to be able to deal with a problem that's only getting bigger by the day. And I think that we can share a lot of good things from Southern California here with others who are open to it. So thank you, Germana, for that.
And Russell, I want to turn to you next, because one of the things we discussed on our prep call is it's phenomenal to have the mental evaluation unit in the moment. But another systemic gap is sometimes we do that assessment, that immediate threat assessment, that immediate de-escalation. Potentially there's a hold. But how do we get people into long-term care and support they need? And what's the systemic gap there?
There are a couple things. One, something I deal regularly with in my work, both with government clients, local law enforcement, and also corporate clients, is the belief that they're crazy, they're off their meds, they need to be on their meds, or they just need to be in therapy. And the idea that you can just take a person, drop them on a doorstep, and hey, now it's your problem, right? Go fix them. And there was a comment earlier today about it's not that easy. There's a difference between showing up because the court made you, or showing up because your parents told you, and actually participating in therapy, embracing it, seeking change. Those individuals, humans in general, have to be in conflict in order to be motivated to change. And sometimes these individuals aren't in conflict, and they don't have a problem with the violent thoughts they're having, and they want to exact revenge. So challenge one is just addressing that misperception that they just need to get back on their meds. They just need to be in therapy. The second issue is engaging the mental health clinicians into threat assessment models so that they can understand their role as threat management partners. And as was mentioned earlier, the information sharing gap between clinicians who have rules of confidentiality and threat assessment teams who need the information. There are, I'm aware of at least one state, Virginia, which I live in now, implemented a law that allowed for information sharing from entities like law enforcement to the threat assessment team, knowing that the threat assessment team would handle law enforcement sensitive information appropriately, act on it appropriately, not disclose it. But that actually has been huge. I have a colleague at the University of Virginia who regularly uses this strategy to gather the information they need so the team can do their job. So that'll be the second gap that we need to address.
Yes, Stuart.
That was just, I agree. If you can have a mental health professional in there. Our agency, obviously, which some others do, we work with de-escalation, mostly communication, or a person with a mental illness, substance abuse, or an individual with a developmental disability. Giving the officers tools. They want tools. They want short-term tools. We try and keep our courses short so they can take some tools away, because you're right. Their ultimate goal is lock down the scene, take this person, find a resource, and they want the resources. We work with departments that their backup is an hour away. They have no mental health whatsoever. They're in charge of 5150s. They do everything. So we have to give them tools in the meantime until funding across the country happens. Because you're right, you had a great group, and it's still minute in effect because it's so many calls out there and different things. So those are the other aspects we're trying to heal a gap for a while until something better can come along, and give them these tools, because they'll refer to the tools for sure. And we get a lot of feedback that they just have more tools walking into a situation.
Yes, my question is for basically all of you again, and it's just a couple of observations, and that is, like, especially with bullying. I was working with Champions Against Bullying going back to the about 2005, and things that we saw going is they got involvement with things like the Kiwanis Club, Moose, Elks, Rotary, and all that, and they sponsored kids to come up with programs and essays and stuff like that. And what we saw happening is, like, in middle school, the sixth graders were, a boy and girl sixth grader were taking like 5 or 6 fourth graders in and kind of showing them around. So it stopped a lot of the bullying because they were with the older kids to begin with. They picked the ones that were popular and that were more level-headed to be those two things. In 8th grade, they did the same thing with the 6th graders and then seniors with the freshmen. And it seemed to have curbed a lot of that. And because it was coming from within the kids themselves, it created peer pressure in the right way to stop a lot of it. And it also started a conditioning early on to think more about the other person, because it's nothing you're ever going to teach in a school. It's something you only learn by doing. There are certain things which you're not going to learn in a lecture on a PowerPoint. You're only going to learn it by experience. And I think that's one thing where these programs come about, is that too much of this stuff is a little too headstrong, as you were saying earlier, and not enough just do and get it, because that's 90% of the learning that the kids get. And it's the same thing with our young soldiers when we come in. As in operations and training, as I spent most of my career at the military, it's the same thing. We got to get these young men and women and bring them forward. And it's like what we did during the Occupy LA when we were working with you, sir, is that you had the older officers with their hand on the shoulder of the young officers to steady them. So the young officers were intimidating with their, muscles and strength, but the older officers kept them from getting drawn in to the scuffle. So it created a good rapport and all that in every way. I think if we look at it more into the interpersonal mechanics of it, and get that in, it builds teams within the team, and it sets up a cycle for continuation that it's just going to keep repeating and repeating.
So I'm going to pull on that theme a minute. One of the gaps that we've seen across the field is also a strength. But we have phenomenally committed individuals who are exceptional at building these programs. I'm looking at many of you right now. I can't see Richard. Wherever Richard is, there he is. And one of the gaps we've seen is, how do we build the systems so that these programs continue in perpetuity beyond the individuals who set them up? Does anyone want to address that?
I'm just going to your point, there's a saying, tell me, I'll forget, show me, I'll learn, involve me, I'll understand. So you're right, it's a hands-on approach. And it is, our agency's been teaching bullying since '93, so before that, and it's a funding aspect to keep these things consistent. DARE program was in for a while, then it stopped, and they say it proved that it wasn't effective. Maybe not. It seemed like it was effective because we would co-op with them as well. It is just a consistency somehow. Like I said, if someone asked me my wish, it would be, give us funding so we can be there year after year after year, age after age after age, because you'll get through. We won't get through everyone. We know that. We all sit in front of audiences, and there's people that we can't connect with, but for the most part, we can make a huge difference, and that's the gap I see, because we feel it in our agency, and I'm sure many agencies, because Susan even mentioned it, the funding aspects and the cycles of those things that happen. It just has to be ranked higher, and that's why I love being in this room, because powerful individuals more so. We're a localized agency. We have federal people now that we're talking to, which is exciting for us. It is that gap.
In terms of your comment, it's really important that we appreciate that brain drain is out there. And we have higher levels of attrition now with law enforcement post the George Floyd era and changes in attitude toward law enforcement. Higher attrition in the schools, higher attrition in clinicians. It's kind of funny because where are all these people going post-COVID? Like, what are they doing now that there's such a need for all of our core professionals in our communities? I don't know if everyone took off to Maui and they're just, bartending now or something.
I told you I was going to do.
Yeah, there you go.
Night.
You'll get there. Okay. One thing is the ability to maintain our personnel and get them properly trained up and have a longitude of corporate knowledge of the organization, of the problems, and how to solve them. The second thing is sometimes it's systemic. For example, my colleagues at Diplomatic Security who are in the Foreign Service, special agents, not the Civil Service, Foreign Service are required to move at least every 3 years. Sometimes they'll move in 1 year or 2 years. They're going to be in Abuja, they're going to be in Tokyo, and then they're going to come back to the US. And when we bring them into protective intelligence and train them, they get very smart about threat assessment. But after 3 years, they're launching out to some other part of the world. Now, the good news is it's sort of like a bee pollinating. They come into our unit, we train them, they actually understand the model, they embrace it, and when they go out overseas to an embassy or consulate, they see the benefit of it because of all the threats that they're experiencing out there, which then leads to me going out to places like Tbilisi, Georgia, and Bangkok, Thailand, training the host nation law enforcement on what this model is and how we prevent these attacks. Same thing happens in the corporate world. One of my clients had a mandatory 3-year move. And that move, the guy who created their threat management program moved to IT security after his 3 years. But his understudy moved to marketing and just it wasn't even doing security anymore. And I advised the client, that's causing your own brain drain. You guys are hurting yourselves. Can you get an exception to where if you're coming into threat management or another specialization and you need training, you need to build your network. And once you're there and you're doing it well, can you leave them there? At least leave them there for 5 years and have a tiered process of the senior leader on 5, then there's the next level person at 3, then there's the newbie at 1, and have them keep moving up the chain, but leave them in place for 5 years so you don't have the brain drain.
Spending most of my career with the U.S. Department of Justice and working very closely with the FBI, I watched that rotation and how challenging it can be for each new person rotating in.
Well, it's the same with law enforcement. We get an SRO, and 2 years later, they're somewhere else. So, but it's the continuous training. Real quick to mention the interactive, we partner with Cole Engineering. It's a military and law enforcement contractor that developed an interactive role play game for active shooter. So what we do is we put them through the front end of the prevention, behavioral assessments. They go through that. Teachers, administrators, law enforcement, they're going through the game, and then we debrief after with them. So it's that kind of realistic kind of thing, and they are very nervous after it because you get caught up in that game. So that's another part of putting them in that position so that they can kind of feel and how you react, because it's called, stress inoculation, conditioned response, and a lot of people learn that way by feeling a little something, and it's different for teachers.
Rachel.
Yeah, I had a question really to pick your brains from a practitioner's point of view. So, I think in the therapy world, most of the time if we're quote unquote reporting, it's usually like a child abuse situation more commonly. In those spaces, I've seen the power of how someone like myself might word a report to an SRO, to someone in authority, to law enforcement. So even in calling a child abuse reporting hotline that I might be mandated to do, I could describe that situation in a lot of different ways, right? So for example, I had the experience of working with a mom who had hit her small child, felt horrible about it, left a mark on the child. I made that report with her in the room, and I'm saying I work with her. I've known her for a long time. She's, remorseful. She's still going to be in the program. That is going to come across quite differently, and you may say, okay, we're making note of that, but you got it handled, sounds like, versus I call and I just say, I have a woman who beat her 5-year-old, there's a mark, bam, right? So do you have words of wisdom, lessons learned to share with practitioners about your needs from a law enforcement perspective when it comes to, what information do you need? How do you need to receive it? What muddies the water? Because I also, we run the risk of making it too short to try to get someone's attention or too long and losing the audience. So any feedback you have about what you would want an educator, a therapist, a practitioner to know?
I'll jump on that. I think the most important thing on any investigative report or report like you mentioned is that you deal with just the facts. And you put in there what you saw, what you found, what the statements were, and then let the investigator take that and then dig in deeper to be able to put the case together. I think when we try and give the benefit of our insight, that's helpful, and that could be as part of the follow-up investigation. But if we try and sugarcoat something because we know the person, then maybe the victim is not going to get the same level of attention or help that they might otherwise get. So I think that trying to be nice, we sometimes run afoul of what's best for the victim. So I think just being objective, as straight out as we can be, here's what I saw, here's what I documented, here's any insight that I have relative to the case overall, and just leave it at that level, and then provide any additional insight to the investigator if you have that ability. But I think to try and modify the way somebody reads it based on a relationship that we have, we ultimately, in trying to do good, we potentially hurt the victim or don't get the victim the necessary help or intervention that they might otherwise get.
I would just say use as little clinical terms as possible, and make it simple so everyone understands, because they may not. And exactly what Jim said, put everything in there, but make it simple read.
Yep. And I'll layer on top of that, a really important point that you made in there is this idea of mandated reporting. We're all very busy with our jobs, with our lives, dealing with our life stressors, families, kids, work, finances, whatever. And because of that, there is a lack of investment in the process, because you just want to do what you have to do to get that off your plate and go. So there's a huge difference between doing a mandated reporting of this is what happened versus being invested in the situation and helping share more information, giving context to the individual you're reporting to, and maintaining part of that process as the case unfolds. So part of this comes down to buy-in. It's just that we need the public, we need everybody to buy into this is my problem and I'm part of the solution. And to invest time and energy, take a moment to step away from all the things that you're worried about and stressed about, and just focus on this and give us your input and your energy so that we can then do our jobs better, because we have better quality information.
We have one from online, which is, are there any international policing or community engagement models that you're familiar with that were successful abroad and may apply stateside?
Okay, that'd be mine. What I would say is, it's a comment that Jim made about community policing, that around the world, you will see different law enforcement agencies developing different approaches to community policing that fit within their culture. There are some cultures that do not, do not trust law enforcement. And there are some cultures that actually will provide information and engage law enforcement because they know somebody needs help or somebody is about to commit an attack. So it's not that I've seen other models working overseas that would work here, but it is that the common models that are out there, like community policing, are just being used in different ways around the world where it better fits. A similar example is I helped a US-based corporation build a workplace violence prevention program. And that makes sense for their employees in the US. They then opened a second headquarters in India. And when you go out to India to train them on this required workplace violence prevention program, the answer you get is, we don't have workplace violence here. But then you start to see reports of assaults, reports of sexual assaults, reports of sexual harassment and bullying all coming in. And it's all in a matter of using words that make sense to that community. So rather than workplace violence prevention, we talk about workplace safety. And especially for those that are working with heavy equipment and they understand the importance of safety around that equipment. Also, when you hear somebody communicating a threat or see some concerning behavior, that's workplace safety too.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead. Jump on in.
I just want to say this before I get yelled at. So we work very heavily with individuals with developmental disabilities, and we were talking last night about the radicalization of those individuals, because they just want to be liked and they'll be told what to do and they'll go anywhere you tell them to go. We've pulled individuals out of gangs and different things. So just in case anything comes up like that, let us know. We're pretty heavy. We're doing something with Homeland to get vendored with something about that. But anyway, that's all. That's my last. That wasn't even a question.
Heidi.
Oh, there we go. Shocker.
I have a question for Russell. So you talked about the importance of community-based threat assessment teams kind of emerging organically. You talked about the challenge of not attaching funding to mandates. So school-based threat assessment teams, that good idea, but who funds them? Can you talk about the issue of funding and resources for community-based threat assessment teams, and who owns that? Who should fund that? Especially if you attach the M for management, because again, I think it takes a lot more than just saying, oh, you should get a mental health provider, you know, here's a referral. Like, it takes a lot of hand-holding to make those things happen. So where should that come from?
So were any of you familiar with the TAPS Act from a few years ago that was introduced in Congress by Congressman Babin from Texas? I was one of the original members that wrote that bill. At that time, I was serving as president of the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, also known as ATAP. And I, you know, just hopped over the river from Virginia to D.C., went to Congressman Babin's office, and there were also Fine and Vosicule, the creators of behavioral-based threat assessment from the Secret Service, as well as Greg Glod, Secret Service agent, and then Barry Spodak, who also worked with Secret Service. And we just wanted to educate the congressman on the problem. This came after the Parkland attack. And what the solutions are. So we built the TAPS Act to be not just training, right? Or not just funding. It's not just grants that go out there. It was a model that provided funding, provided training and a model for training, and then provided a model for case consultation so that there was sustainability in that program. Where does the money come from? It would be great if Congress brought the TAPS Act back. We really believed in it at ATAP. All of our ATAP members at the Threat Management Conference wrote postcards to the chair of the Judiciary Committee that was overseeing that bill, trying to get them to move it to the House floor where we knew it would get passed. We had 170 sponsoring members of Congress, and it's pretty good. And they were actually added what they called Noah's Ark, which is one Republican with one Democrat, in order to keep it balanced so it wasn't seen as one side's issue over the other. If the funding can't come from the federal system, there are things like the Stop School Violence grants that are out there, and other grants for targeted violence prevention. But the federal system needs to contribute its money. The problem is that local resources, you know, communities with the sheriff's department, trying to tie in with the schools, and they're going to look to their county for funding, and the county says, well, but you know we don't have money, all right? So you're just going to have to figure out how to do this creatively. Well, counties turn to states. States also say we don't have money. And then it goes back to the feds, who are the ones that print the money and seem to be able to spend it everywhere, to say, okay, we're going to contribute that money. I joke as a fed. It's an issue of bringing everyone to the table and saying, what part of this are you going to help with? And where is this resource going to come from? And then giving them the model that they can put into action and a sustainable program that is practicing at the level of excellence that we adopt within the ATAP community. Because the other part is when people are told to do this and they go out and do it, but they don't do it right. And they're not using excellence in practice. And they're just trying to do rote behavior, check in the box stuff, and then somebody gets killed.
I'm going to put you on the spot just a little more. So if it ultimately comes back to the feds, ideal funding structures within the federal government for some of these community-based threat assessment and threat management teams that aren't embedded in schools.
That was one of the challenges of the TAPS Act, was who does it belong to? Right? So that these programs can get implemented. When we wrote the TAPS Act, Enter National Threat Evaluation Reporting from DHS had not yet gotten to its level of activity that it is now in training master trainers in a standard threat assessment curriculum to send them out into communities to give that training locally. So Enter has been a significant help with getting the message out, the model out, and getting people trained up. So we argued about DHS versus DOJ, and, you know, is this going to be an FBI thing that's run through JTTFs? What about the regional intelligence centers? Ideally, we would have multiple partners contributing to this pool. It's not just a DHS issue or a DOJ issue or a DOD issue, but we want everybody to say, okay, this model makes sense. We're just intervening with people who are struggling to get them help so that they don't kill themselves or anybody else. And then trying to see what pools of money actually make sense for applying it to this problem set, and then encouraging that money to transfer over along with that programmatic model and structure.
And I'm going to add HHS and ED to that
Absolutely.
potential consortium as well. I want a quick time check, Neil. We're about up, and lunch is next. Jumana, is it something we can ask of another panel?
Predicament to the progress of the work. So
personal experience with this,
very
perhaps?
personal experience, very heartfelt. But we don't have to discuss it, and I think we do have people in the audience who could maybe shed light on how can we engage philanthropy, funders, and private sector to be a pillar in how we understand funding in this space? Because clearly funding is an incredible gap. We do have levels of success, but they're not always there. On the point about international, I would point to the Netherlands, Rotterdam in particular. Some of what they're doing in terms of law enforcement response and embedding non-lethal response or sort of non-armed response, and the way those kind of parallel and work together is something I would also point to following the previous question. But thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we are breaking for lunch. I think Neil has one thing to say to you all.
Well, first, just thank you for this panel, and if we can give them a round of applause.